Welcome to the Art of We podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about a subject that we had a suggestion for, a topic from one of our community members. And the topic is about navigating a relationship that is healthy and functional, but there is no chemistry. So that's basically the topic. And we don't have any more information from their background about it, but we felt like it was a really important topic to discuss. And it actually ties into a relationship agreement that we have, that we also turned into a vow, that we haven't talked about on this podcast yet. And that agreement is relevant because it's something that really helps us as a couple keep a certain level of chemistry and intimacy and connection in the face of day-to-day life, in the face of challenges, and in the face of, just being with the same person in a long-term relationship. So that agreement is to forever explore the depths of our connection, generativity, and sexuality. Will, do you want to give a stab at talking about what that means to us and why we might have that in place?
Yes, I really like this one because in my psychology, continually having to look at the difference between I have to versus I want to. I lived most of my life from the point of view of I have to. And in the time leading up to meeting you in 2017, I was really looking at what's my life going to look like if I live from I want to, if I base my life on desire and learn to trust living from desire. So generativity and sexuality and sexual desire is an important component of that for us, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it's so common to let these particular aspects of a partnership fall away, and they're very creative. And by generative, we're like, it feels alive, it feels co-creative, it feels energetic, and it's so easy to let these things fall away when we're in the day-to-day, when we're facing life challenges, when we're getting so used to each other as people and as partners. And having this agreement in place, I have the perspective, and I think that you do too, Will, that we can never reach the maximum amount of connection we can ever have. It's like there's always room for more connection. There's always room for more deepening in our intimacy and our sexuality. And if we're having the perspective that there's a cap at it, then I think that on some levels we're limiting what's possible in our partnership.
For sure. I think that's where the word forever in the beginning of the vow really is important. And you're also speaking to a piece that I really agree with that we've touched on in other conversations on this show about the tendency of the human brain to automate our partner. And we do this in every aspect of how we relate to our partners. And it's an energy conservation strategy of the brain to not see one another with fresh eyes every day, but rather to moving into, let's say, a sexual encounter, and I'm imagining it's going to go a particular way, or I'm going to invoke a sort of automatic behavioral sequence here that maybe we both really enjoy, but it's nevertheless automatic, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, to your point about novelty and dopamine and being with the same partner over years and years, it is something to reckon with, is the neurology of the brain.
Right. And I think that it's important to say what you are saying here, but for us, it takes work. And I don't mean this as like hard grinding work, but it's like we need to consciously put intentionality and effort and love and care into growing these aspects. I think that if any couple is not paying attention to these aspects consciously, there is a very big chance that it might start to drift away or be at a limited level or something that's unsatisfactory, basically. I've never known any couple who hasn't had to put time and intentionality into this area. And that just comes like super easy and it's super amazing and they're on the same page and all of that. So with all of that said, I think it's a great entry point into speaking to this person's request around a topic, which is, okay, we have a really healthy and functional relationship, but there's no chemistry. So Will and I have talked about the different ways that we would approach this. And the first way is to basically ask you, have you had an explicit conversation with your partner about this? And are you both on the same page that there's no chemistry? And are you both in a place where you're like, okay, there's no chemistry. We get each other's worlds about that. Do we want to have chemistry? And if so, are we willing to do the work to co-create that together?
Exactly. I think it's important not to assume what is going on for our partners, and also not to assume that this is going to be a priority. If you don't have a vow like the one that Krista just shared about, forever exploring the depths, then this conversation might feel more out of the blue for your partner.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But doesn't mean that you can't have it, doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. And, anything that's a thorn in your side should be talked about with your partner anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Or some sort of concern. So, assuming that that's already been talked about, then let's go ahead and take a look at the different areas that you and we would explore if we hit this road bump. And so we came up with different buckets. And so if you're listening to this, you'll hear different invitations to bring curiosity to these different parts of your life to see like, oh, okay, maybe that's the thing that's going on. Because we're really into getting more to the root cause rather than attempting to put a Band-Aid on something that might last for a little while, but then it kind of comes up again. So, Will, do you want to speak first about a certain area of curiosity that you would bring to this conversation?
Thanks. I think the most common pattern that I've seen in friends in long-term relationship, especially with kids in the house, is that it can be very challenging to carve out undistracted, quiet, private time to explore one another and to keep investing in that part of a relationship. And it's really common many years, or even a few years of raising children, to feel like you're good business partners running the organization of your family. It could be very smooth and easy and respectful, but without much in the way of spark or chemistry or sexuality, it can fall away. So
Right. Or
that,
if you didn't have kids and you both are massively into your careers and
yeah,
you haven't been prioritizing the one-on-one connection, like, hey, let's have, every Wednesday night a date night, and let's create a certain format to help us basically create more intimacy rather than the daily kind of vibe that we're living in.
definitely. So then it becomes an inquiry of priorities and what are we investing in our relationship? What's important to us? Some couples live in this business like partnership without much in the way of sexuality and feel fine about it. So we're not,
Mm-hmm.
making that wrong here, but if both of you want something different, that's what we're talking about here.
Right. Right. And then that would lead me to another place to look, which would be interpersonal. So, is there something between the two of you that feels like there's not any chemistry because there's something like issues? That's something unresolved, like issues between the two of you. Or can you tell if it's between the two of you specifically because you might have attraction for other people or your partner has attraction for other people? I think that's a good indication. Or are there other ways that you guys are getting your intimacy needs met outside of the partnership? And I think that when I mean intimacy, I'm not necessarily talking about sexuality, but it could be emotional intimacy. It could be even physical intimacy with something like pornography. But are there ways that what could lead to chemistry between the two of you, are there ways that it's leaking out in these other ways? And like you're saying, well, it's not getting prioritized between the couple. So that would be an investigation that I would
Sure.
have.
Or there could be resentments that have built up over time, or avoidance of some conflict that has happened in the past around sexuality or approaches, or, who's approaching who. And, it gets old if one member in a partnership is the one who's always initiating intimacy, for example. And so that person could get burnt out of that pattern and stop wanting to do that.
Mm.
All kinds of possibilities in terms of the interpersonal layer.
Yeah, I think it could be a chemistry killer if you have any of those things that you just spoke about and you're not talking about it. And I think that it can be really hard because we've talked to people like this, couples like this, where you think that there's not any underlying resentments, or you think that there isn't issues that are being under the covers, so to speak, rather than above the covers, because they've been under there for so long and haven't been resolved. And so it's kind of like, can you go back to the moment when the two of you did at one point have chemistry and feel into the space between when that was happening and what's happening now, and see if you can uncover any issues that you can notice that, oh yeah, we never really resolved that big fight that we had about finances or the loss of a family member or types of challenges.
Yeah, I think the prevailing pattern that I've seen in couples is a sense that attraction or sexuality should just be something that comes to the couple rather than the couple having to commit to it and cultivate it and work with it and be with it. It's kind of like hoping that you're going to have a beautiful vegetable garden in your backyard. And you keep looking out there and it's just a bunch of weeds, and you never even go out in the garden to try to plant
Water
anything.
it. You're not watering it.
Yeah.
You're not weeding it.
Yeah.
And I'll say too, like, I think just in honesty, like for you and me, Will, it's like, even if the chemistry doesn't always feel like it's there, it's like we're committed to something much bigger between us than the chemistry. And so we've talked about in other episodes how we navigate our own intimacy and our sexuality on some level. And we show up for the moment when we're like, okay, it's time for us to become more intimate. It's time for us to have, some skin time. And even if we're not in some sort of big chemistry bomb, it's like we're committed to the deepening of our partnership. And this is one way to express that and be with each other around that and ask for what we need and feel into what we need to create the conditions that would have us find our desire and find our turn on, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of like if there's something you already prioritize in your life, you can look at your life and see where you do things without being asked to do it. And you just automatically are going and doing it, no matter how you feel about doing it that particular day, right? You're showing up for it. Things that are lower priorities in your life are the things that you have to really reckon with yourself to get where you can show up for it. There are ways to elevate something inside of your own psychology from being low value for you, low priority, to being very high priority. But that also takes work, right? You have to see all the benefits to yourself and your partner and your relationship to turn that into a priority. And that's where I think, for me, it helps to think about the generativity that we're talking about as a source of energy and a source of life and aliveness. Because if I think about sexuality as sort of like an ice cream cone that feels pleasurable, and it's like an indulgence or some kind of like extra thing that's really just about a moment or two of pleasure, then I'm not really driven to invest in it the same way. Maybe that's just because I'm not the kind of guy who drives around town looking for the new ice cream store.
Thank God.
But if someone says, "Hey, you want to go get some ice cream?" I might say, "Sure." But
and I'd be like, well, honey, what about this ice cream over here? I got 21 flavors. Why are you going somewhere else?
31, Lava.
31. Actually, I have 50 flavors now that I'm 50 years old.
That's right.
Well, I love that analogy. Well, why don't we take a quick break? And when we come back, we have 3 extra buckets of places, topics that you can investigate that we would suggest you would with your partner to see what's in our buckets here to find more and cultivate more chemistry. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. We are excited now to go into some of the different areas that are worthy of exploration as root causes of this phenomenon of we don't have any chemistry in our partnership. And the first one that comes to mind for me as a traumatologist, trauma survivor, trauma researcher person is to really consider the possibility that there may have been experiences that you had that are impacting your desire or your capacity to feel your desire.
Even inside of a partnership, for example. So what can you say a little bit more about what you know about either little T trauma or big T trauma and how it impacts the chemistry in one's body, so to speak, so that could impact the chemistry between two people?
Well, there's all kinds of different ways that can come forward. A common way, which unfortunately is common, I wish it wasn't common, but the experience of power dynamics and sexual interactions and dominance and submission and not having great training in our culture for young people about how to advocate for themselves, how to have empowering sexual experiences, and so on, can lead to psychological injuries around sexuality, for sure. The other prevalent issue, which you named briefly earlier, is pornography. And I'm saying boys because that's who mostly is consuming the media. Pornography media online has become so ubiquitous and so accessible that very young boys are getting into pornography before they even hit puberty. And so there's a patterning that deeply impacts what that child expects and defines as a desirable experience to have. And
I would say
so,
even not just today's boys though, because like I would say this has hit all the generations that have come before us on some level,
oh, for sure.
whether it was magazines or something at some point that really impacted what does it actually mean to be deeply intimate together to create a kind of chemistry that goes beyond the images and the thoughts of what it should look like. Is that what you're talking about?
Definitely. Yeah. And in recent times, I'm talking about the accessibility that comes from having an iPad in your backpack or an iPhone in your hand. These videos and images are really accessible. It's different when you have, and a lot of families choose to do things this way, which I think is a great idea, is to have a fixed location for a desktop computer at home. And that's how you use the internet, is in a family room where, there's no privacy and opportunity for misuse of the internet for children. So, but you're right, it's been going on for a long time.
Right. So I'd be curious about that for the relationship. And we could go down a lot of aspects of obviously trauma and sexual trauma. There's so much there to be talking about. For this episode, we can go to the next bucket that we're going to look at, which is physical. And we're talking about like physical attraction. So this is an interesting one because it's like, are you both physically attracted to each other? Are you guys not? Is one of you, but the other one isn't? And this is like, how do we talk about when there's not physical attraction? And first, I think, can we be really honest with ourselves about not being physically attracted to our partner? The second is really being an investigator about why we're not physically attracted, and then courageously bringing that into the we between us, the we space. Like, how can we talk about these things in a way that are supporting our partnership rather than making each other wrong? And I guess another question is this something that is changeable, physically changeable, or is this something that's not changeable?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, on the physical level, assuming that we've investigated the interpersonal and the psychological and the possibility of some kind of impact of trauma in the past, we can look at, we can certainly look at hormones. We can look at things that interfere with the actual chemistry of the body to play a role in the loss of desire.
Right. So that was actually the last bucket, which was more of the biological. So the hormonal, what's going on there. But I'm talking about like, what happens if one partner's like, you know, my spouse or my partner has gained like 20 pounds and nothing wrong with how they are, but I just am having a really hard time finding my own attraction to their body. And what do I do about that?
Should you just close your eyes and pretend that you're with?
No, that's horrible. That is not the art of we. I can't believe you said that.
The art of not we.
The art of not we. So anyway, if we go back to just the physical attraction piece for a minute, let me just ask you, Will, how would you address the issue if you found out or kind of woke up like, yeah, actually, I'm not really attracted to Krista? How would you approach that from an art of we perspective?
Good question. I think I would feel some fear about bringing that to you if there was something very physical, like how you smelled or what your body looked like, to me or something along those lines. But I think that the art of we would dictate that, or suggest at least, that there needs to be a straight conversation about what I'm experiencing. And I'd want to frame it in a way that where I'm really owning my own experience and not putting it over there or making you wrong, or, causing you to have any doubt about your own physicality or your own body and so on.
If I had bad breath, like a chronic bad breath or something, and you're like noticing this and you owned your own experience about that, what would that sound like? Just so the listener can be like, oh yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it would be something along the lines of, look, I have something to share with you that's potentially a sensitive topic. Is this a good time to talk about it? And making sure that, you're feeling receptive to that before we go straight into it. That'd be
So
step
first,
one.
like just, getting permission to be in the conversation together of a challenging conversation. Yep.
Step two, I'm noticing something that's kind of vulnerable to talk about, is having a response to your breath. It seems like something's changed from before. I'm not sure what it is, and it's interfering with my attraction to you. And I wonder if you'd be willing together to take a look at that and see what we can do about it.
Right. Right. And then, obviously understanding the impact of what we're saying, and maybe even getting the person to replicate back what we're saying so they're not making up any stories about what we're saying. It's such a tender and vulnerable conversation to talk about each other's physicality and what turns us on and what turns us off, especially. So I think that's a really good start to that.
Yeah, and I really want to know what this brings up for you, and want to hold all the different aspects of what this evokes for you, so we can just be in it together and work with this together.
Right. And what I'm really wanting here is I just love you so much, and I really want to be close to you. And I know that we can solve this together, but I think that we need to figure this out.
Yeah, exactly.
Something along those lines. So thank you for modeling that on the fly. That was amazing. So yeah, that's a tender one. And I would also say, what about getting support around these kinds of conversations, or even going to a couples coach or a couples therapist to help have the harder conversations together about our chemistry? Because I think that would be brilliant to do if you don't have the kind of support currently with your partner, or you don't trust your partner can handle this kind of conversation. Then it's like having that conversation of like, hey, I think we need to get some extra support.
For sure. And it could be a close in, trusted ally, friend that is also trusted by your partner, not only by you.
Totally.
But yeah, and so being sensitive to what specific topics you would want to reserve for that kind of moderated conversation, if you anticipate that this is going to be really difficult for your partner.
Yeah. So the last bucket that we're going to look at today, and you touched on it, Will, which is hormonal. And this is such a big one. I know for me, as I'm now 50, I'm definitely going through a hormonal change. I know we go through changes in our hormones our whole entire life, essentially. And I'd love to hear from you, Will, as a physician and also as a psychiatrist. Can you dial in a little bit of what you would suggest for a couple who, if there isn't chemistry, and let's just assume it's hormonal, what would you suggest that they do in terms of next steps to figure out what is going on with our hormones?
Right. And so in this conversation, it becomes important to know the course of the sort of the narrative of, when did this start? How did it start? Did you have plenty of attraction to each other earlier and now it's gone? Or was it never there in the first place? It was never there in the first place. Did you have chemistry with previous partners? I used to hear from my patients quite a bit, people saying that they had a lot of chemistry with a prior partner, but they don't have it with this one that they're with now. And the suffering of comparing their current partner to the past partner in that regard's painful for everybody.
Totally.
So in the context of what you said about menopause and getting older, they're certainly worth considering hormones as a part of the conversation. But as you can see from the way we structured this conversation, we left it for last because oftentimes people go to this place first instead of last, and miss some of the nuances of the interpersonal and the psychological. So that part's really important to us to make sure it doesn't get minimized. testosterone is really the hormone of sexual attraction, and men and women become deficient in testosterone over time, and it can be a game changer when someone tests low for that hormone and gets the right kind of support to accurately and carefully restore that level to normal. And that's an art that the right practitioner will be able to do really well with you. But again, I think it's not the first thing to go to.
Right. And even from a systems perspective, if even one person is experiencing any of the things that we listed in this podcast episode, any of the buckets, from a systems perspective, it's going to be impactful on your partner and your relationship. So it's not like you both might have emotional trauma, or you both might have resentments, or you both might not have the right hormones. It's like if one person doesn't have it, it's going to be impactful in some form, and potentially even be like leading us to think that we don't have chemistry when there might just be an imbalance there going on. I know that, for example, you haven't had any testosterone issues, but in the last couple of years since you've been lifting weights, like I would say your testosterone's gone up quite a bit. And I would certainly say that your activities and your hormones have impacted intimacy in a certain way, even though there wasn't a problem before.
What's different now from your point of view?
It's very nuanced, but I feel like you carry your body in a different way. You have a particular kind of physical confidence in yourself that feels not like a big gap from before, but I feel like you feel more physically confident. And I don't know if there's pheromones involved in your higher levels of testosterone, but I think that there are. And like, I personally feel the impacts of you having a higher level of testosterone in your body.
Well, this is an interesting illustration of the chicken or the egg phenomenon, right? What I mean by that is you were speaking earlier about if you're not feeling very generative about your life or your career, or if you're not feeling fulfilled in your life in whatever endeavors you're taking on, whether it's career or family or whatever the endeavor is, then that chemistry is going to be communicated to other people.
Absolutely.
And not only other people, but also yourself. So you might feel less sexy, less attractive, less confident, less in your body if you are really struggling to find your way in the world around what's meaningful to you.
Right. And your partner is going to pick that up as well.
Right.
Subconsciously, maybe consciously, but that is going to impact the field.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
I'm glad that you brought that back around.
I feel grateful to be in a phase in my life where that's not what I'm challenged with.
Totally.
I have other challenges, but that's not one of them right now.
That's awesome. Good. Well, I feel like we did a good job of touching on several aspects of where one might potentially look or begin to look if they're not experiencing chemistry, even though they have a really great and high functioning relationship. So hopefully this is helpful. And if you're listening to this episode and we didn't touch on something, or this hasn't pointed you in the right direction, we would love for you to reach out to us and let us know. You can find us at KristaVanDerveer.com, or you can go to your favorite podcast platform and you can leave us a message in the review to let us know, hey, I want to hear more about this, or this didn't resonate, or give me some more info on this, or how would you guys navigate that? We would love to hear from you.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, and we'll be with you next week.